Okay, welcome to Chapter 18, Conservation and Biodiversity. This is part of Unit 2. This is one of the ones we're out of order, but I think that this goes right along with Chapter 5 really well, so we're going to do that. Okay, so why should we care about biodiversity? There's a lot of reasons, and these are very important things that you need to be able to recall. This is why we should respect nature, period. This is why we should protect it, not just biodiversity, but within protecting the environment, you're protecting these things as well. So the fact is, a lot of wild plants and animals provide us with food, clothing, and shelter. Also, a lot of our food crops have been cultivated from wild animals. Maize was the wild form of corn, and of course we've changed it over time through selective breeding, but many of our fruits and vegetables ultimately originated with wild crops. And for a lot of people, they still do. There's also a lot of medicine that comes from plants, lots and lots. I told you about arroyo willow, which is aspirin, so foxglove is digitalis, and Pacific yew is Taxol. So lots of our drugs come from them. Hugely important. We're doing a lot of research with a lot of animals and plants looking for drugs or medications that will cure cancer and stuff. So that's another reason we should be concerned. Plants and animals have a lot to do with our industry, gum, clothing, waxes, fragrances, dyes, lumber, paper, firewood. Lots of it originates with wild crops or wild animals and wild plants. So there's a lot of our stuff that would not exist without it. So, and there's a lot of stuff we can still potentially get from the environment. Not that that's the only reason we should keep it, but it's one of the reasons. There's also a lot of ecological benefits. I've mentioned some of these before. Plants use carbon dioxide in the and use carbon dioxide in the carbon cycle as photosynthesis, and that's part of the food web, which is very important. It also removes carbon from the atmosphere, which helps with global warming. Nature recycles all of our biogeochemical cycle nutrients. So we need those nutrients to cycle the nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, sulfur, phosphates, all those. So that's very important, just cycling the nutrients. Pollination is a huge one, of course. Not only honeybees, but a lot of native insects pollinate our crops. It would cost billions of dollars for us to actually have to go pollinate our crops. And your apples and oranges would be a lot more expensive. Soil formation. Nature creates soil. We need soil to grow our plants and our agriculture. So that's a hugely important. If we had to actually make our soil again, it would be multi-billion dollars cost. Pest control. A lot of our pests are controlled by things. Bats eat a lot of insects. Mosquito fish eat a lot of mosquito larvae. So a lot of it is controlled by nature, and we would have potentially increased pest issues if not for those other organisms. Waste purification. The fact is that the ground purifies our water, and so do trees. They purify our air. So nature cleans up a lot of our mess. It really can. There's actually even plants, they're called, it's called phytoremediation, where plants will actually pull toxic stuff out of the ground, either into their tissues or into the soil around their roots. And it makes it much easier to clean up spills by letting nature do it. And of course, plants definitely purify our air. They remove a lot of the toxins and other pollution from our air, which is very important. So these are all reasons that we should keep nature, period, but we should definitely be concerned with biodiversity and having a high biodiversity in these environments. There's also the intrinsic value. The fact is that nature should be preserved just because it's nature, and it has a right to be there just as much as we do. Not just because we can enjoy it and we think it's pretty, but just because it is. I mean, every living thing has a right to live just because they live, and they are living. But there's also intrinsic value in the fact that you can, hunt and hike and fish and stuff like that. And ecotourism, we saw that in Racing Extinction. Promoting ecotourism to help save the environment. Making people realize that there's money in biodiversity. People want to come and see these things in the wild, and that can bring money in rather than killing them. Okay. Genetic diversity. We're very concerned about all diversity decline. Genetic diversity, of course, is of a great concern because if you have a very low genetic diversity, there's not a lot of genes in there, and maybe the gene that's needed for a specific adaptation to a situation is not in the population, and it makes the population less likely to survive. If you have a very low gene diversity within a population, it's called inbreeding depression. Basically, when relatives or very, very highly related individuals breed and reproduce, the offspring are much more likely to have issues with survival and reproduction. They're just less viable. They're just not that good. Yeah. Okay. We see a lot of genetic diversity decrease with domestic crops in our livestock because we're breeding out the genetic variation to get what we want. When you keep breeding animals and breeding animals for specific traits, those specific traits, you're breeding animals with more and more similar traits, and so you're breeding out the variety, which means all Chihuahuas are Chihuahua size because you've bred the genetic diversity out of them. This can cause problems. Animals that are very low with genetic variation are not able to survive and adapt as well to situational changes, and therefore are more likely to become extinct. So even when we're talking about agriculture and stuff, if you have a crop of corn that's all genetically the same and a disease comes in, it's either going to wipe out none of your crop or the whole darn thing. And chances are it's going to wipe out the whole darn thing. So you got to be very, very careful when you're talking about that. Species diversity. Right now, IUCN, which is the International Union of Conservation of Nature, big group that oversees a lot of international stuff, although again they just set policies. The countries that participate in the IUCN have that kind of the teeth behind it, which is one of the problems with a lot of international groups, that they don't have any kind of police behind them or teeth behind them to regulate any of these laws. So IUCN basically has 5 categories for animals. One being data deficient, meaning we don't have any reliable data to determine the status of a population. Extinction, which basically means it's known to exist recently but no longer. So it just recently became extinct. Threatened is a high risk of extinction. It's what we here in the United States would refer to as endangered. Near threatened, which means they're very likely to become extinct or threatened in the near future. And then of least concern, which means they're widespread and abundant, and we really at this point don't have any concern with them becoming threatened in the near future or extinct. So those are your more common animals. So those are the categories that IUCN uses. So you should just be familiar with them. IUCN has evaluated over 50,000 species. About 1/3 are considered threatened. 1/3 of all reptiles, fish, and invertebrates, and 1/4 of all plants are considered threatened, which means their numbers are low enough that there's a potential of them becoming extinct in the near future. Now remember, in the near future is an important thing, because the fact is, by history, all species eventually become extinct. So you can't just say, oh, they're likely to become extinct, because you can say that about every single one. It has to be in the near future. Their numbers are low enough that we're concerned that within the next 50 to 100 years, they're going to be gone, if not less. Ecosystem diversity is very important because it affects the number of species. The more complex your environment is, the more niches it has, the more resources it has, the more species it can handle. So if your ecosystem diversity is declining, your species diversity is also declining, which means that there's less function in your ecosystem. So there's less pollination, less purification, a lot less of the services. Stop it. Silly dogs. What are you? Seriously, they're fighting over a receipt. Oh, sorry. Dogs. My silly dogs. I should put a picture of in the PowerPoint of them, just because they always interrupt me. Okay, so back to ecosystem diversity. So we want to make sure that the ecosystem diversity, there's a high ecosystem diversity, because then there can be high species diversity, and we need all those species and that diversity to do a lot of the services for us. Okay, here's our rankings. These are basically what we rank stuff in the United States. Endangered means it's serious risk of extinction, which means the species, they're in imminent danger of extinction. Their number or their range is so small that there's a good chance that if something happened, they're going to be wiped out. Some examples of animals that are critically endangered: California condor, we're working with that, whooping crane, giant panda, black rhino. There's a bunch of others, but those are some of them. We're working with the California condor and whooping crane here in the U.S., and we have whooping cranes that come through here occasionally. Of course, panda is being worked with over in China. We're helping with the black rhino here, but of course that's in Africa. A threatened species is one that its population is getting low enough that we are afraid that in the near future it could become endangered. So, we kind of want to keep our eye on it. Grizzly bear and American alligator are examples of that. This is a graph out of your book. I think it's interesting. If you take a look at it, you see that amphibians, 41% are threatened. That's a huge number. So why? Why are amphibians threatened more than anything else? Well, fact is, amphibians live in water, and their eggs are in water. So if you have any water pollution, they are highly susceptible to water pollution. And the fact is, we have a lot of water pollution, and water pollution affects you to a greater degree than air pollution, because we have a lot of atmosphere, and a lot of the air pollution will dissipate. And it's harder to contribute things to air pollution, because it's harder to know if the person, it's harder to know if you breathed in bad air, but it's really easy to know that you're living in really polluted water. So amphibians are for that reason. Birds are of the least concern, because birds actually live in our environment quite well. They can adapt to humans. They can still live in our trees, and we still have bushes and trees and stuff like that. So we kind of affect their habitat less in some ways. And they can deal with, eating our insects and our plants and stuff like that. Mammals are a little bit in the middle there, because again, we're doing most of this is occurring due to habitat destruction. Destruction does not necessarily mean destroying it like making it a school or a road, but it can also be degradation, which means decreasing the quality of it. So even the area around the school has a decreased quality for animals, and so that area is even being degraded. So it's not even just where you're doing the habitat, it's the area around it that can impact things too. So we'll talk more about that. Okay, so the causes of biodiversity. This is my favorite thing, HIPCO. The HIPCO helps you remember these things. The H stands for habitat degradation, the I for invasive species, P for pollution, P for population, human population that is, because as the human population increases, it increases habitat degradation and increases more invasive species and causes more pollution and creates more global warming and causes more overharvesting. So if the human population is going up, it's affecting all the others. Climate change, C is for climate change, and O is for overharvesting, overhunting, overharvesting, taking too much from nature. Okay, you know what? I think we are going to stop there, and I'm going to hit all these in PowerPoint number 2. So have a great evening, guys. Bye.